David Brooks walked with his daughter's hand in his, her backpack swinging gently as she told him about her drawing, unaware of the woman across the street slowing her pace to match theirs. The woman's stare sharpened with each step, her phone already in hand before a word was spoken. Moments later, sirens cut through the air, and the calm walk home shattered. Guns drawn, commands barked, a child screaming for her father as he lay face down on the pavement. And just as the world turned its back on him, a camera kept rolling. A simple phone, held steady in a father's hand, capturing a lie, because what happened that day wasn't rare. It was routine, and this time, it wouldn't be buried. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The sidewalks in Oak Ridge Heights stretched wide and spotless beneath the late afternoon sun. The kind of clean that spoke more to control than care. Each blade of grass was trimmed to identical height, every flower bed tucked neatly behind wrought iron gates and motion sensor sprinklers. It was the kind of neighborhood where silence wasn't peace. It was policing. And David Brooks felt that silence pressing in with every careful step. His daughter's hand was small but firm in his, fingers curled tightly as they crossed the street toward the tree-lined lane just 2 blocks from their home. Lily swung her backpack a little with her free arm, her blonde hair catching the light as she skipped slightly ahead, and then fell back beside him, smiling in that unbothered way only 7-year-olds could. She had a crumpled drawing in her other hand, crayons, hearts, a house, and had spent the walk telling him which part of it was him and which part was her. He nodded, adding a gentle, "That's beautiful, baby." Every few steps, his mind half on the moment, half on the tension he'd noticed earlier. It wasn't what Lily saw. She didn't feel the eyes from across the street. She didn't notice the way the woman with the yoga mat had slowed, adjusted her pace, then turned and doubled back again. She didn't register the tightening rhythm of high-end sneakers hitting pavement with too much purpose. But David had. The woman wasn't jogging anymore. She was watching. And that wasn't a stretch. It was fact. He had felt it before. The weight of gaze mistaken for protection. The hard lines behind polite questions. The sense that someone had quietly decided he didn't fit. And now they were just trying to prove it. He knew exactly where this was headed. Not because he was paranoid, but because he'd lived long enough in places like this to see how suspicion traveled faster than kindness, especially when someone like him was walking next to someone like Lily. Still, he kept his voice easy, leaning down to her just slightly. "Almost home," he said, nodding toward the next intersection. She smiled and squeezed his hand again, crumpling her drawing in the process. He didn't mention it. The paper wasn't what mattered right now. From across the street, the woman cut an angle. Fast, direct. She wasn't jogging anymore. She was coming over. David gently pulled Lily a little closer, without making it look like anything. They reached the sidewalk and continued walking. He didn't break stride, didn't flinch, but he could feel the way her footsteps sped up behind them, then came alongside. She matched pace, her chin slightly raised, that voice already carrying the kind of syrupy concern that didn't need words to sound like judgment. "Hi there," she said, eyes not on him but on Lily. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" David stopped. He turned slowly, calmly, his back straight, voice even. "She's fine," he said, offering a small, firm smile. "We're just walking home." The woman's eyebrows didn't move. She took a step closer, leaned slightly to get a better view of Lily's face. "Sweetheart, is this your dad?" Her voice pitched higher, like she was asking a child to whisper a secret. "Do you know this man?" Lily blinked, caught off guard. She looked up at David, confused, then turned to the woman. "He's my daddy." The woman laughed once, sharp and breathless, like she'd just heard a joke she didn't believe. "Oh, right. Of course." David's eyes didn't leave hers. "Ma'am," he said slowly. "We're just trying to get home. Please stop talking to my daughter." But the woman had already taken a step back, hand fishing into her leggings for a phone. Her fingers were fast, confident. She wasn't second-guessing a thing. She was dialing. David stood still. He looked at Lily. Her smile had vanished, replaced with a slight frown as she watched the woman mumble something into the phone, turning her back and stepping away like she'd just spotted a broken fence she needed to report. "She's calling someone?" Lily whispered. David bent slightly and rested his hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said. But the words sounded like they were for her, not him. "Just keep holding my hand." The woman's voice carried, not loud but clear enough. "Yes, right now. On Willow and 32nd. A little girl, white, maybe 7, blonde. She looks scared. There's a black man with her. No, I don't know if she's hurt, but she's not answering me." He's saying he's the dad, but David didn't wait to hear the rest. He pulled out his phone, calmly opened the camera, and began recording. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't run. He just stood still, one hand holding Lily's, the other steadying the phone. Across the street, another neighbor peeked through a window. He had seen this before. Not this exact version, but close. He knew what happened when truth didn't matter as much as appearance. And he knew that once flashing lights showed up in neighborhoods like this, they didn't ask questions first. They arrived with decisions already made. And somewhere in the distance, a siren began to rise. The siren was faint at first, just a low wail threading its way through the treetops, distant enough that the neighborhood's peace still held. But David knew better than to take that distance for comfort. His fingers, still wrapped gently around Lily's hand, tightened just a little. Not in fear, not even in urgency, but in preparation. He didn't need to say anything. The world around them had already begun its quiet shift. The woman stood several steps away now, still on her phone, but her body was angled in a way that made it clear she was watching him just as closely as she was reporting him. The smirk on her lips wasn't obvious, but it was there, settled in the corners like a wrinkle she didn't care to hide. She didn't look afraid, not even slightly. That was the part David noticed most. She wasn't acting like someone worried about a child being taken. She was acting like someone proud to have caught something, like she'd just called animal control on a loose dog and was waiting for someone to come claim her reward. Lily was staring up at him now, the way she did when she didn't understand something and wanted him to explain it. But there were no gentle answers for this, only quiet damage. "She thinks you're not my daddy," Lily said softly, her eyes wide and uncertain. David crouched down slowly, bringing himself to her level so he could look her in the face. "I know, baby," he said, brushing a strand of hair back behind her ear. "But she's wrong. And we both know the truth. That's what matters right now." "But why would she think that?" she asked, her voice wavering. David exhaled through his nose, slowly. "Because sometimes people look at someone and decide they don't belong, and they think they're doing the right thing by calling someone to fix it. But not everyone who acts concerned is actually trying to help. She doesn't even know us. She doesn't have to. Some folks decide what they believe before they ask a single question." The woman was pacing now, still on the call, her voice louder. "Yes, they're just standing there now. She's clinging to him. I don't know. Maybe he's trying to keep her quiet. You need to hurry, please." David rose to his full height again, still holding Lily close, his phone still recording. The screen glowed steadily in his hand, a quiet witness. "Ma'am," he called over, voice steady. "You're making a mistake." She turned quickly, her expression indignant, like he'd just broken some unspoken rule. "Excuse me," she snapped. "I said you're making a mistake. This is my daughter. I'm her legal guardian. You're traumatizing a child because you think your instincts matter more than facts." I'm doing what anyone would do, she fired back, stepping toward them again, tone rising. She looks scared. She hasn't said a word to me. She doesn't know you. Why would she talk to a stranger who's shouting questions at her like she's a hostage? You're awfully defensive. I'm protecting my child. That's what fathers do. The woman crossed her arms, eyes darting to his phone. You recording me now? Is that supposed to scare me? It's supposed to protect me. She gave a short laugh, biting and sharp. This neighborhood doesn't play games, sir. We look out for each other. I'm your neighbor, too, David replied, keeping his tone even. Or does that only apply to certain people? Before she could answer, the sound of a vehicle grew louder. Tires crunching over asphalt, the familiar grind of brakes as a patrol car slid up to the curb. David turned his head slowly as two white officers stepped out. Both tall, both broad-shouldered, both with their hands already resting on the grips of their holstered weapons like they were expecting something to go wrong before they even said a word. Lily stiffened immediately. Her grip tightened around David's hand until her knuckles turned pale. "Daddy," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm right here," he said, eyes on the officers. "Don't let go." The first officer, name tag reading Grayson, stepped forward, hand up, not as a greeting, but a stop sign. "Sir, we received a report about a possible kidnapping. I'm going to need you to step away from the child and put your hands where I can see them." "She's my daughter," David said, his tone still calm but slightly louder now, clearer. "I have custody papers. I have video of this encounter. I am not raising my voice. I am not moving, but I will not leave my daughter's side. Sir, step away from the child. I have done nothing wrong." The second officer, Kemp, circled slightly to the side, hand near his radio, muttering something into it. The woman stood off to the left, arms folded across her chest, nodding at the officers like she was confirming her own story in silence. She didn't speak now. She didn't need to. The damage had already been done. Her role was complete. Lily pulled on David's hand, panic growing in her voice. "Daddy, please don't let go of me." "I won't," he said. But the officers were already moving in. The air tightened like a noose. The moment hung on a thread, and as one of the officers shouted again for him to get on the ground, David knew the thread was about to snap. Officer Grayson's voice sharpened like the edge of a blade as he took another step forward, posture rigid, hand now fully unholstered and pointing straight at David's chest. "I said, get your hands in the air. Now!" David raised both arms slowly, phone still recording, keeping his posture open and his face calm, though every instinct in him screamed to shield Lily, to block her from the chaos that was spilling into their quiet walk home. Her small frame was tucked behind his leg, clutching the fabric of his pants, eyes darting wildly from the officer's gun to the woman still standing a few yards away, arms crossed like she was overseeing a home inspection. "Please," David said, voice measured. "You're frightening my daughter. I'm not resisting. I have every document you'll need. My wallet is in my back pocket. My ID, my custody." "He's getting angry!" the woman suddenly yelled, her voice high and urgent as she took a step toward the officers, pointing now, twisting her face into the perfect mask of concern. "He's yelling! I think he's about to run." "No one's yelling," David said immediately, shaking his head, eyes flicking between the two officers who were suddenly moving faster. "I haven't moved. I've done nothing but comply." But the woman's words had landed exactly the way she wanted them to, sliding into the air like oil on fire. "Get on the ground!" Grayson shouted, advancing with his weapon raised. "Get on the ground right now, or we will use force." "Daddy!" Lily screamed, voice breaking as she tried to grab his arm tighter. "Don't shoot!" David called out, dropping the phone and moving as slowly as he could to his knees, never lowering his hands. "I'm going down. I'm going down! But they were already on him. The moment his knees hit the pavement, Kemp rushed from the side, slamming him onto his stomach with a force that knocked the wind out of him. His face hit concrete. A knee pressed hard into his spine. One hand was yanked backward at a brutal angle, then the other, metal locking tight as the handcuffs snapped shut. The pain flared through his shoulders, but it was the sound of Lily screaming that cut deeper than anything. "Stop it! Stop hurting him! That's my daddy! Please stop!" "Ma'am, step back!" one officer barked at her as if she were the threat. Lily tried to rush forward, but Grayson blocked her, crouched low and firm, holding her back with a hand on her shoulder that was meant to calm but only made her flinch. "Let me go! Let me go!" she sobbed, struggling against his grip. David couldn't see her now. His face was pressed to the sidewalk, cheek scraping rough against the concrete. The cuffs bit deeper with every breath he tried to take. "You're making a mistake," he gasped, speaking into the ground. "That's my daughter. I'm her father. Please don't separate us." "We'll sort that out at the station," Kemp muttered above him, breath heavy and close. "You should have complied sooner." "I did comply." Grayson leaned down toward Lily, speaking into his shoulder mic. "Child appears distressed. We're going to place her in protective custody until we can verify custody." David lifted his head as much as the pressure would allow. "Don't you take her. She's already scared out of her mind. I have every—" "Enough," Kemp snapped, giving the cuffs a harsh tug. "You can talk at the station." 2 more officers arrived in a second patrol unit, one of them stepping toward the woman who had made the call. She met them with a serene smile, nodding like she was being thanked for her service. "I didn't know what he might do," she said, with a calm shrug, her tone soaked in righteousness. "She just looked afraid. I followed my gut. No one questioned her. No one asked what had actually happened." David was lifted roughly to his feet, arms wrenched behind him, his face burning with humiliation. Neighbors had gathered now, some standing behind hedges, others filming with phones. But no one stepped in. No one asked the right questions. Not yet. Lily was placed into the back of the second cruiser. She was still crying, face pressed to the window, small fists pounding against the glass. David tried to turn toward her as they shoved him toward the other car. "Lily, I'm okay, baby. I'll come get you. I promise." The door slammed before he could finish. Darkness closed in around him, sirens flaring again as both vehicles pulled away from the curb, one with a father in chains, the other with a daughter still screaming his name. The woman remained standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed again, nodding faintly to herself as if to say, "See? I was right all along." David is taken to the station, placed in a holding room without charges, ignored as he asks about Lily. Officers delay processing him. After hours pass, someone finally verifies his ID and custody paperwork. He is released without apology and finds Lily sitting alone in a separate room, shaken and silent. The emotional weight begins to settle in. The holding room was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the kind of chill that seeped in slowly, curling around the corners of a man's patience and settling just beneath the skin. David sat on the edge of a steel bench bolted to the wall, wrists still raw from the cuffs that had been removed without a word 30 minutes earlier. No one had spoken to him since they walked him through the precinct's side door. No charges read, no questions asked, just a heavy silence that told him everything he needed to know about how the next few hours would go. He stared at the small black camera in the corner of the room. It blinked red every few seconds, a quiet rhythm that mocked the stillness around him. No clock, no windows, no sounds except the occasional echo of footsteps, or the distant crackle of radio chatter bleeding in from the hallway. He had asked, twice, If someone could tell him where his daughter was. The first officer had grunted and walked off. The second didn't bother to look up from his clipboard. David leaned forward now, elbows on his knees, fingers pressed together tightly as if holding them apart would let something slip through. He had been through worse. He had grown up in foster homes where attention only came when someone needed a scapegoat. He had been stopped before, questioned before, doubted before. But nothing about those experiences had prepared him for the sound of Lily screaming behind glass, while strangers dragged her away from him. The minutes folded into hours. No one brought him paperwork. No one offered water. The officers moved past the small window in the door with casual indifference, like he was a filing error they hadn't gotten around to correcting. He couldn't tell whether it was intentional or just routine. Both possibilities were equally bitter. At one point, he stood and knocked on the door, not with anger, just clarity. The officer who finally entered raised a brow like David had interrupted something sacred. "I'm going to need to speak to someone now," David said quietly. "I have identification. I have custody papers in my wallet. You've had me here for over 2 hours, and I want to know where my daughter is." The officer didn't answer immediately, just looked him over like he was recalculating something. "Name?" "David Brooks. My ID is in the wallet you took when you brought me in. So are the adoption documents." The officer sighed through his nose, turned without a word, and walked out. Another half-hour passed before someone else appeared. An older man this time, plain clothes, holding a manila folder and wearing the look of someone who had just been pulled from something more important. "Mr. Brooks," he said without apology as he opened the door, "we've confirmed your identity and custody status. You're free to go." David stood slowly, every part of him stiff from waiting. "Where is my daughter?" "She's in a separate room down the hall. Child Protective Services had her temporarily placed for safety until we could verify everything. Take me to her." The man nodded and led him down a narrow hallway that felt longer than it was. They passed a few officers who didn't make eye contact. David didn't care. Every step echoed with the memory of Lily's voice, the way it had cracked when she yelled for him, the way her fists had thumped against the back window of that cruiser. By the time they reached the door, he could feel his heart pressing against his ribs like it was trying to get there first. The door opened with a quiet click. Lily sat in a small plastic chair, feet swinging slowly above the floor. Her eyes were red and puffy, and the drawing she'd made that afternoon at school was clutched in both hands like it was the only thing keeping her anchored. She didn't look up immediately, but when she did, when her eyes met his, the paper dropped, and she ran. David dropped to his knees just in time to catch her, her arms locking around his neck so tightly he could barely breathe, and he didn't care at all. He held her there on the tiled floor of that cramped room, arms wrapped tight around her trembling frame, pressing his forehead gently to the side of hers while she whispered through sobs, "I was so scared, Daddy. I thought they weren't going to bring you back." "I'm here now," he said, barely able to speak through the thickness in his throat. "I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Behind them, the plainclothes officer cleared his throat, awkward but not unkind. "There's some paperwork to sign on your way out." David nodded, eyes still locked on his daughter. "You'll wait." And for once, someone did. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and faint lavender, the way it always did after the cleaning service came on Thursdays. But tonight, it didn't feel clean. It felt hollow, like the rooms were waiting for something to be said. But neither of them had the words to offer. Lily was quiet when they walked through the front door, her hand still curled tightly into his, her eyes darting from room to room like she was checking to make sure it hadn't all followed them home. David hung her backpack on the hook by the door and crouched down to help her with her shoes, fingers steady, even though everything inside him still throbbed from the grip of the handcuffs and the bruising on his shoulder. She didn't ask for dinner, didn't ask for her favorite show, didn't even ask why no one had said sorry. She just walked straight to the couch, curled up on the end with the worn yellow blanket she always used, and pressed her cheek into the cushion like sleep was the only way to shut the day out. David watched her for a long moment before turning off the overhead light and lifting her into his arms. She didn't wake, just exhaled softly against his neck, the way she had when she was younger, before nightmares became something real. He carried her to her room, tucked her in carefully, and kissed her forehead without saying anything. The words felt too small for a day like this. Downstairs, the kitchen was still. He sat at the table with the overhead light on, casting a pale circle across the wood. The house was paid off. The fridge was stocked. The furnace had just been serviced. All the things that were supposed to mean safety. All the quiet victories that weren't loud enough to shield him when it counted. He reached for the small black folder on the bookshelf, his emergency file. It was old, but updated often. Adoption certificate, school records, medical forms, birth parents' death certificate, guardianship papers. He spread them out on the table like pieces of armor. He had done everything right. Every form filed. Every renewal submitted. No corners cut. No room for doubt. And still, he had been thrown to the pavement in front of his daughter because a stranger didn't like the shape of what they looked like walking down the street together. He sat there a long time. No TV, no phone, just the hum of the refrigerator in the background and the soft creak of the heating vents as the night settled in. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want some dramatic confrontation. What he wanted was accountability, measured, undeniable, and public. He opened his laptop and began searching. It didn't take long. Her name had come up on a neighborhood app before, Karen Ellsworth. A few clicks led to more. A quick reverse lookup confirmed the street. Same block, same voice from the video. He found threads, some locked, others archived. A post about a suspicious man waiting outside the elementary school gate turned out to be a father picking up his son. Another thread about someone lingering near the tennis courts. It was a delivery driver stuck on a late route. No arrests ever made. No reports ever verified. But the usernames lined up. The language repeated itself. She had done this before, more than once. And every time, the story was the same. The target changed, but the fear stayed white. He bookmarked everything, took screenshots, saved profiles. There was a trail here, and it wasn't invisible, not if someone had the patience to follow it. When he finally leaned back, the clock on the oven read 2:43 a.m. His eyes were heavy, but his thoughts were sharp. He had always believed in staying composed, staying quiet, staying out of the fray. That had worked, until it didn't. He opened a new tab and typed in the name of a civil rights law firm he'd kept bookmarked since the week he finalized Lily's adoption. He hadn't needed it then, but something in his gut had told him it was worth keeping just in case. He clicked the contact form. He filled in his name. He kept the message short. Unlawful detainment, public profiling, emotional harm to a minor. I have video, documents, and witnesses. My daughter is 7. She saw everything. I'm ready to talk. He hit send, closed the laptop, stacked the papers back into the folder, hands moving slowly, deliberately, like every page he slid back into place was one step closer to making sure this never happened again. Upstairs, Lily shifted in her sleep. David stood from the table, reached over to turn off the light, and walked toward the staircase, each step steady, each breath measured, the kind of quiet resolve that didn't need anyone's permission to be powerful. The conference room was tucked inside a modest brick building near the heart of the city, a converted two-story house turned legal office, where the hardwood floors still creaked beneath careful footsteps, and the windows let in more sunlight than most lawyers preferred. Monica Herrera didn't keep a nameplate on her door, and she didn't need to. Her reputation traveled faster than introductions. She greeted David with a short nod, no handshake, just a gesture to the chair across from her desk, and a quiet, "Let's talk." She listened without interrupting, as David walked her through everything: the walk home, the woman's questions, the call, the guns, the handcuffs, the hours in that holding room, and the look on Lily's face when they finally opened that door. He spoke steadily, never raising his voice, never losing control. But by the time he was done, the weight of the story sat heavy between them. Monica didn't lean back or tilt her head the way some attorneys did when they were trying to look thoughtful. She leaned in, hands folded, eyes steady. When he finished, she didn't offer sympathy. She offered clarity. "She's done this before?" David opened the file he'd printed the night before, sliding it across the desk with careful precision. Screenshots, forum threads, copies of 2 archived neighborhood posts and comments she had made under her real name. One about a black teenager lurking near a dog park who turned out to be walking his own pet. Another about a suspicious man waiting in his car across from the school who turned out to be a father waiting for his daughter. I double-checked usernames, dates, cross-referenced some LinkedIn data, and email accounts, he said, tapping one page gently. "It's her. She's been making these accusations for at least 3 years. No arrests, no follow-through. Just pattern and paranoia." Monica flipped through the pages slowly, reading as she went. "And the police report from your detainment?" "They didn't give me one. I requested it through a records request portal yesterday morning. It's still pending." She nodded. "We'll request it formally through my office. And once we get it, we compare the language used in their report to the footage you recorded before the arrest. If there's a discrepancy, especially about whether she claimed you were aggressive, we include that under false reporting." David nodded once, slowly. "I want this to be bigger than just me." Monica raised her eyebrows. "You're thinking class action? Only if we find others who've been harmed by her reports. Or anyone else who's been wrongfully detained because someone felt something instead of knowing anything." "Good," she said, her voice like a blade being set gently on the table. "Then we'll need more than screenshots." David already had a list, 3 names pulled from neighborhood message boards, one of whom had commented on a post with, "This sounds just like what happened to me last year." The man, a substitute teacher named Harold Bell, agreed to meet the following afternoon. The others hadn't replied yet, but David knew how to follow a thread once he found one. "We'll handle her civilly," Monica continued. "Defamation, emotional distress, intentional infliction of harm. If we can demonstrate that she knowingly made a false claim, or that she had a pattern of behavior showing bias and targeted suspicion, she's liable. As for the police, we'll separate that angle. Wrongful detainment, violation of civil rights, potential 1983 federal claim." David studied her face carefully. "What are the odds this actually gets traction?" She looked up from the file and met his gaze. "You're calm, credible, documented, and you didn't raise your voice once while telling me about being thrown to the ground in front of your child. That speaks louder than outrage ever could. And if we get even one more story that matches yours, that's a pattern. That's the foundation of something a jury can see clearly. People don't like being told about racism, but they'll see a little girl screaming for her father while 2 officers drag him away, and they won't need to be told anything." David exhaled slowly. "That's what I'm counting on." Monica stood and extended a card. "My assistant will reach out tonight. We'll start formal intake, and I'll assign one of our researchers to pull her employment history, any HOA complaints, and see if there are other records we can subpoena." He took the card without a word. There was nothing left to say. The work had already started. As he stepped out of the office into the late morning sun, he paused on the sidewalk and looked back at the small building behind him. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. But it was exactly the kind of place where something real began. He didn't need revenge. He needed truth. And now, truth had a lawyer. It began quietly. An upload to a private link, forwarded from Monica's office to a journalist they trusted, someone who had covered civil rights stories with care and without spectacle. The woman's name was Jordan Lynn, and by the time Monica finished briefing her, she didn't need convincing. She reviewed the footage twice, then called Monica that same evening and said simply, "I'll write it, but I won't write around it." Within 48 hours, the video was published alongside a carefully written feature. The headline didn't scream. It didn't sensationalize. It simply read, "Man detained, daughter separated after false 911, call in Oak Ridge Heights." But the words were secondary. It was the footage that ignited the fire. The opening shot was David's hand holding the phone steady, his voice calm. Lily's face turning slowly toward the woman with a puzzled frown. The moment her small voice said, "He's my daddy," the woman's laugh, her dismissive tone. Then the officers arriving, guns drawn, commands shouted, David's quiet compliance. And finally, the sound of Lily screaming as he was slammed to the ground. That cry, high and piercing, struck people harder than any article could. It played again and again across timelines and comment sections, clipped and reposted by strangers who didn't need to know David's name to know what they were seeing was wrong. The image of a child crying for her father while being pulled away by strangers was more powerful than any caption. By the end of the day, the video had surpassed 500,000 views. David didn't look at any of it. He stayed off the news, avoided the comment sections, silenced every notification on his phone. He didn't want to know what people thought. He didn't need validation from strangers. He had seen what mattered. And he remembered what it felt like to sit on the sidewalk with his face to the pavement while his daughter screamed behind police doors. Monica, meanwhile, handled the noise. She spoke with journalists, filtered interviews, coordinated outreach. Her voice remained calm, but her inbox flooded with messages, some from reporters, some from viewers sharing their own stories, and a few from people who had crossed paths with Karen Ellsworth long before this case made her name public. "She used to work at a private school," one woman wrote. "She flagged a black parent during pickup once because she didn't recognize him. The school brushed it off." Another came from a man in a neighboring suburb. "She filed a noise complaint on me for waiting in my car on her street. I was doing DoorDash. She told the dispatcher I was surveying the neighborhood. They made me get out of the car at gunpoint." Monica added each one to the growing case file. With each new report, the shape of the narrative changed. It was no longer just about David and Lily. It was about a pattern, about unchecked entitlement dressed as concern, about how certain people learned to weaponize fear under the illusion of safety. The police department, feeling the pressure, released a brief statement the next afternoon. "We are aware of the incident involving Mr. David Brooks and are currently reviewing procedures surrounding his detainment. At this time, both responding officers have been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of an internal investigation. We ask for patience as we conduct our review." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't accountability. It was a placeholder. David read the statement once and set it aside. "They'll apologize when they're forced to," he said to Monica, who simply nodded in agreement. That night, while Lily slept upstairs and the living room filled with soft light from the reading lamp, David sat at the table again, not hunched this time, not burdened, but steady. He opened the folder, reviewed the additions Monica had emailed, and jotted a few notes. He didn't want to be famous. He didn't want headlines. What he wanted was permanence, something on paper, something that would outlast public attention spans. The doorbell rang once, and his neighbor, a quiet man named Yusuf, who rarely said much beyond greetings, stood on the porch holding a small plant in a ceramic pot. "I saw the video," he said softly. "If you ever need help with anything, I just wanted you to know." David took the plant with a quiet "thank you" and placed it by the window. Small, green, alive. It didn't fix anything, but it didn't need to. It was a sign, a gesture, and right now, those were starting to matter. The next morning, Monica called with a list of scheduled interviews. Major networks, national outlets. Some had already run stories without waiting. David paused, then gave the answer he knew was right. "Let the video speak. I'll stay quiet until it's time to testify." Monica didn't argue. She knew this wasn't about performance. It was about proof. And the world had already seen enough to understand that silence didn't mean weakness. It meant patience. And patience was building something stronger. By the end of the week, the pressure became impossible to ignore. The police department, under mounting scrutiny, held a short press briefing where the chief confirmed that Officers Grayson and Kemp had been formally suspended without pay pending the results of the internal review. It was a carefully worded move meant to placate, not admit. No apology. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just the usual language of concern and protocol evaluation spoken behind a podium flanked by flags and stone-faced officers pretending not to notice the camera flashes. For the public, it wasn't enough. Not after the video. Not after Lily's tear-streaked face had become the image shared across the country. Not after the body cam footage, quietly leaked by someone inside the department, showed that neither officer had even attempted to de-escalate before drawing their weapons. Then came Karen. Her name had been circulating online for days. Speculated, hinted at, finally confirmed when local records and past neighborhood app comments were matched against the voice in the video. Within hours, her identity was public. So was her face. News vans began parking outside her gated home. Her employer, a consulting firm specializing in crisis management, issued a single-sentence statement. "Karen Ellsworth is no longer employed with our company, effective immediately." The irony was not lost on anyone. And then she did what no advisor could have possibly recommended. She agreed to an interview. It aired on a local station. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, posture stiff, voice composed in the way only people who have never had to explain themselves tend to sound. She didn't apologize. She didn't backtrack. She defended. "I did what any responsible person would do," she said, the corners of her mouth pinched with frustration. "I saw a child who looked distressed, and I acted. I'd rather be wrong and make a call than be right and do nothing." The anchor pressed gently, asking if she had any regrets about how it unfolded, about the trauma inflicted, about the fact that David was Lily's father, about the pattern of previous accusations now coming to light. "I'm not a racist," Karen said firmly. "I care about safety. That's all this was. People are trying to paint me as some kind of monster because I trusted my instincts." The backlash was immediate. Clips of the interview flooded social media, edited down to the sound bites that hit hardest. "I'm not a racist," and "trusted my instincts." Late-night hosts mocked her. Civil rights groups condemned her words. And slowly, more stories began to surface. Neighbors who had once stayed silent, now speaking up. Parents who had been watched too closely at the school gate. Delivery drivers who had been followed down the street. Even a real estate agent who said she was forced to cut a showing short when Karen called security claiming someone was casing the property. Monica gathered each story and added it to the case file, building the framework of a pattern that could no longer be denied. The picture that emerged wasn't of a single bad judgment. It was a routine, a practiced performance of suspicion dressed up as community concern. David watched it unfold from a distance. He still hadn't spoken publicly. He let the footage speak for him, let the outrage rise around him while he focused on what came next. Each development felt important, but none of it changed what he had already decided in the quiet of his kitchen that first night. Justice didn't come through noise. It came through evidence, and it stuck when it arrived with proof. Lily asked him one night why people were saying the woman was in trouble now. He thought for a long moment before answering. Because sometimes people do things over and over again that hurt others, and they think no one's going to stop them. But eventually, enough people speak up, and that's when it changes. She nodded, then climbed into his lap and held onto his arm. "Are we going to be okay?" David kissed the top of her head, letting his answer settle in before he gave it. "Yes, we already are." Outside, the city kept moving. Headlines changed. Stories shifted. But for once, the center of the storm was holding its shape. And the people who had watched from a distance, who had stayed quiet when it was easy, were now beginning to understand that silence wasn't protection anymore. It was complicity, and the cost of that was rising. The courtroom wasn't grand or dramatic. No sweeping architecture, no gallery of gasps, just beige walls, worn benches, and the low murmur of shuffled papers and rustling suits. But David felt the weight of it the moment he stepped inside. The air thicker, slower, like the building itself knew what it carried. He sat with Monica at his side, flanked by assistants who spoke in low voices and moved with practiced efficiency. The legal team had prepared him thoroughly, but the nerves weren't about facts or cross-examination. They were about Lily, about what she had seen, about how it might feel to speak it aloud under oath. Across the aisle, Karen sat with her own attorneys, two men in tailored suits who whispered to her often, reminding her to keep her expression neutral, her posture straight. But even from a distance, it was easy to see that neutrality wasn't her strength. She shifted often, glanced toward the gallery, smoothed her blouse, and fidgeted with her bracelet. She looked like someone clinging to an image that had already slipped. The proceedings began with opening statements. Monica's was deliberate, composed, and grounded in facts. She didn't dramatize. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke of fear, humiliation, and the deep damage inflicted not by one mistake, but by a pattern of behavior rooted in assumption and unchecked power. She let the timeline unfold on its own, supported by documentation, video, and testimony. Karen's lawyers tried to reframe the incident as misguided but well-intentioned, painting their client as a concerned citizen who responded to what she believed was a child in danger. They warned against turning a misunderstanding into a movement, cautioning the jury not to punish someone for acting from the heart. But when the evidence began to speak, the heart had little left to hide behind. David took the stand with the same quiet dignity he had shown since the beginning. He didn't embellish. He didn't flinch. He described every detail as it had happened. How Lily's hand felt in his, how the woman approached, how her voice sounded when she laughed at the word daddy, how the sirens grew louder, how the pavement felt when his cheek hit it. He told them what it was like to hear his daughter scream while he lay face down, unable to hold her. Monica asked only what was necessary. The video played. The courtroom was silent. The judge approved a closed session for Lily's testimony. She was accompanied by a court-appointed advocate and a child psychologist, and though her voice trembled at first, she answered clearly. Yes, the woman had scared her. Yes, she had said, "He's my daddy." Yes, she had seen the guns. Yes, she had cried. Yes, she had thought they were taking her away forever. Karen didn't meet Lily's eyes when the transcript was read aloud in the courtroom. When it was her turn to testify, Karen took the stand with a carefully prepared expression, a mixture of regret and self-justification. She insisted that her concern was genuine, that she had simply seen something that didn't look right. She referenced her own children, her community volunteer work, her long history of civic engagement. She called it a tragic misunderstanding. But Monica's cross-examination was measured and exacting. "You made a call based solely on the way the man looked?" "No," Karen said quickly. "It was the child's expression." She seemed nervous. "Do you remember what the child said to you?" Karen hesitated. She said he was her dad." "And then you laughed." Karen's jaw tightened. "I didn't mean it that way. You made previous reports about other people of color in your neighborhood, correct?" "I acted on concern." "Were any of those reports ever substantiated?" Karen paused. "Ms. Ellsworth, yes or no?" "No." "Did you ever apologize to any of them?" Silence. The jury didn't react outwardly. No gasps, no notes passed. But their stillness said everything. They were listening. Monica's closing statement was simple. She didn't appeal to outrage. She returned to the facts, the chain of decisions, the harm caused, the evidence gathered. She spoke of the right to walk with your child without fear. She spoke of the cost of suspicion when wielded carelessly. And when she finished, she stepped back without flourish. David watched the jury as they filed out. He didn't wonder what they would decide. He already knew what the truth had shown. For the first time since that day on the sidewalk, he felt something begin to loosen in his chest. It wasn't over, but it was close. The jury returned just before noon on the third day of deliberation, filing back into the courtroom with quiet expressions and locked eyes. No one looked at Karen. A few glanced at David, but not with sympathy, more like recognition. A silent acknowledgement of something they could no longer deny. David sat upright beside Monica as the court clerk read the verdict aloud. The words moved slowly, but each one landed clean. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, David Brooks, on all counts. We award compensatory damages in the amount of—" He heard the number. He knew it was high, higher than anyone had predicted. But he didn't feel triumph. He didn't blink. He just exhaled once, quietly, his gaze fixed on the edge of the table as if grounding himself there. Karen didn't speak. Her attorneys showed no reaction. But behind them, in the gallery, there was a murmur, a mix of relief, quiet clapping, and one audible breath from someone who had likely been holding it the entire trial. The judge called for order, then addressed the court directly. "In addition to the civil judgment," she said, voice steady, "this court will refer the matter of the false report for criminal investigation by the district attorney's office in accordance with state statute." David looked up then, not at the judge, but at Karen. Her face was pale now, her posture rigid, hands clutched so tightly in her lap that the skin around her knuckles had gone white. There were no words for her. None needed. Everything that needed to be said had already been placed into evidence. The courtroom emptied slowly. Monica gathered the paperwork, her expression unreadable as always, but there was something in the way she moved, less guarded, more settled. She turned to David once the room was nearly empty. "You were right to stay silent," she said quietly. "The video did the talking. The facts held. That's rare." David nodded. "It's not about the money." "I know." They walked together to the steps outside the courthouse, where a small group of reporters waited with microphones and cameras, their questions already rising as soon as the doors opened. Monica stepped forward, delivered a firm statement on behalf of her client, and then guided him away without inviting a single follow-up. It wasn't a moment for sound bites. It wasn't theater. Later that evening, news of the verdict swept through every major outlet. Headlines framed it as a landmark decision, a case of racial profiling resulting in a definitive civil penalty, a rare legal consequence for a false accusation made in public. Analysts called it precedent. Activists called it overdue. David didn't watch the coverage. He spent the evening with Lily instead, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with art supplies scattered around them. She was making a new drawing, one of their house, with wide windows and bright yellow curtains. She'd labeled the stick figures carefully this time. Daddy, me, safe. He kept his phone face down on the kitchen counter. Monica had sent him a brief update by text. Internal review complete. Both officers terminated. Final statement from department will be issued tomorrow. That was enough for now. The next morning, the department issued a press release that sounded more sincere than their earlier efforts. It acknowledged procedural failures, poor judgment, and a breakdown in communication that should never have placed an unarmed father and his daughter in danger. The chief admitted that the department's policies on community reporting and bias training were being urgently revised. It wasn't perfect, but it was public, and it was permanent. David sat in his office at home, the door slightly open so he could still hear Lily humming in the next room. He reviewed the signed court documents one more time, then opened a new file on his computer and typed the title at the top. Brooks Legal Aid Initiative. Mission Statement, Draft. He didn't know all the logistics yet, but he knew what it would be for. Families like his. People who didn't record their arrests. Parents who didn't have a lawyer waiting. Kids whose cries never made it to the public. He leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of the past few weeks settle. Not as a burden, but as foundation. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about permanence, something lasting, something better than silence. And for the first time since that day on the sidewalk, he felt like they weren't just surviving. They were shaping something new. The community center wasn't large or polished. The floors creaked, the chairs didn't match, and the walls bore the faint scuffs of a building that had served more than its share of youth programs and voter registration drives. But today, it felt full of people, of purpose, of something that didn't need gloss to feel real. David stood near the front, dressed simply in a gray blazer and open-collar shirt, hands resting at his sides as guests filtered in. Some he knew, neighbors, old friends, former co-workers. Others he didn't recognize but had seen the video, read the articles, followed the case. Families who'd come quietly, not to congratulate, but to connect. A few brought children. More than a few brought stories. The Brooks Legal Aid Initiative was printed in soft blue letters across a folding banner that hung behind the small stage. Below it sat a table with brochures, donation forms, and a list of partner attorneys already committed to volunteering time. Monica stood off to one side, clipboard in hand, speaking with two young organizers who had come from a nearby law school to offer support. She moved with calm certainty, avoiding attention while ensuring everything stayed on course. At David's side, Lily clutched a clipboard of her own, far more colorful, covered in stickers and slightly bent from the weight of enthusiasm. She had insisted on helping greet people at the door, handing out name tags with surprising confidence for a child who, just months ago, had barely spoken after what happened. Her eyes sparkled now. She was whole again, not because the world had changed, but because her father had refused to let it break her. As the chairs filled and the murmurs quieted, Monica stepped forward to welcome everyone, keeping her remarks short. She introduced David not as a client, not as a symbol, but simply as someone who refused to stay silent. He took the stage with no notes. "I didn't plan to speak today," he began, his voice steady and even. "Because I always believed the point of all this wasn't about me. It was about what happened, and what we do next." There was no applause, only attention. The kind that came from people who understood that something heavy was being shared. Not grief, not pride, but truth. "When this started," he continued, "I didn't know how far it would go. I didn't know if the court would care. I didn't know if people would believe what we lived through, but I did know that I couldn't let it slide. Because if I did, then Lily would learn that silence is the safest choice. And I couldn't let that be the lesson." He paused then, eyes landing on her in the front row, where she sat beside a woman who had come forward during the trial. Another parent who had once been accused of something untrue for no reason other than how she looked. "So now," he said, "we're doing more than just remembering what happened. We're building something for the people it keeps happening to. We're making sure they don't have to walk into courtrooms alone. We're making sure their stories don't get dismissed because they don't have the right words or the right contacts or the right kind of outrage. This fund, this initiative, isn't charity. It's protection. The kind people deserve before something goes wrong." He stepped back, didn't wait for applause, just nodded once and left the stage the same way he had entered, quietly, grounded. People approached him afterward. Some shared stories. Others simply shook his hand or placed a name on the mailing list. One woman hugged him without warning and whispered, "My brother was arrested last year for asking directions. This matters more than you know." As the crowd thinned and volunteers began stacking chairs, David helped fold the banner with Lily by his side. She was still chattering about how many stickers were left on the sheet and whether they could make new ones for the next event. "We should make shirts," she said, looking up at him, "with the logo, and maybe a superhero version of you." He smiled gently, crouching beside her. "We don't need superheroes," he said. "We just need people to pay attention and speak up when it counts." She nodded seriously, then slipped her hand into his. They walked out into the early evening together, the last ones to leave, the sun casting long shadows across the sidewalk in front of the building. It didn't feel like a finish line. It felt like the first steady step in something larger. And this time, no one questioned who they were. The courthouse looked different now. Not in its structure. Same glass doors, same tired security guard at the entrance, same beige corridors stretching too long in either direction, but in the way people looked at it. It no longer stood as a place where silence swallowed everything. It had become something else. A marker. A symbol of what happened when someone refused to lower their eyes. Karen Ellsworth stepped through those doors with her head slightly bowed, flanked by two attorneys who moved briskly but not confidently. The cameras outside clicked rapidly as reporters called out questions, none of which she answered. Her usual tight smile was gone. Her hair was pulled back too neatly, as if trying to mimic control, but her hands trembled just enough for the nearby lens to catch it. She didn't speak during her arraignment. Her attorney entered the plea, not guilty, on her behalf, but the courtroom didn't hold its breath. This wasn't a trial for headlines anymore. It was the slow part of justice, the quiet part, where consequences didn't arrive with outrage, but with documentation and time. The judge set a date. She was released without bond, and she walked out, not like someone escaping judgment, but someone stepping into it. David watched it later, not in real time, but in a quiet clip played during a news segment about the case's long-term effects. He sat at the dining table with Lily beside him, half-focused on a coloring book, the TV low in the background. "They showed her again," Lily said without looking up. "I know," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. "That part's not over yet. She didn't look the same." David nodded, watching her carefully shade in the window of a house with blue crayon. "People usually don't. Once they realize what they've done can't be undone. The media had shifted their tone in recent weeks. Where once the story had centered around the confrontation, now it focused on the movement it had sparked. Profiles of the Brooks Legal Aid Initiative had been featured in statewide papers, and a short documentary was in production. Local officials had begun reviewing the department's response protocols to civilian calls, with one policy advisor citing David's case by name. The two officers, Grayson and Kemp, were officially dismissed. Internal records flagged them as permanently disqualified for reinstatement, and their personnel files were released under pressure from advocacy groups. The footage, once leaked, had become part of department-wide retraining modules, a result no one had expected, but everyone had pushed for. David never made a show of it. He didn't grant interviews. He declined podcast requests, politely turned down invitations to panel discussions. But when the local university's law school invited him to speak at a student-led forum on civil rights and everyday legal response, he said yes. Not for attention, for clarity. The auditorium wasn't full, but it was engaged. A mix of students, professors, and community members sat quietly as he stepped to the podium, notes folded in his hand, but never read aloud. "I didn't come here because I have the answers," he said, his voice even but weighted. "I came because something happened that could have been ignored, that could have passed, like every other story just like it. But we didn't let it. That's all. We didn't let it." He talked about the difference between feeling wronged and being willing to do something about it, about the cost of exposure, about what it means to watch your child become a headline before she understands what it means to be profiled. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. And when he finished, there was a pause. Not hesitation, just reflection, before the first round of applause broke out. Not loud, not performative, just real. Outside, a student approached him, notebook in hand, nervous smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Mr. Brooks, I just wanted to say, your story changed how I think about things. I used to think this kind of stuff was rare, but now I realize I've just never been the one it happened to." David offered a quiet nod. That's the part people miss. It doesn't need to happen to you for you to stop it. Back home, he walked through the neighborhood at dusk with Lily by his side, the sidewalks familiar again, the air cooler now that spring was fading into early summer. No one followed. No one questioned. One man across the street even offered a small nod. Brief, maybe unsure, but it was something. Lily skipped ahead a few steps, arms swinging, then turned back. "You think that woman's gonna go to jail?" David considered his answer, careful to keep it honest without weighing her down. "I think she's going to have to live with what she did, and I think the world won't forget it this time." Lily thought for a moment, then nodded. "Good." They reached their gate just as the porch light flicked on, soft and warm against the settling dark. And as they stepped through, side by side, it didn't feel like they were walking away from a fight. It felt like they had changed the ground they stood on. The seasons had shifted by the time the dust fully settled. What once happened under the weight of heavy spring air now belonged to early autumn. Leaves scattered across sidewalks, cooler mornings settling in over yards once watched too closely. Time had passed, but it hadn't erased anything. It had simply reshaped it. David sat on the back porch one Saturday morning, warm coffee in hand, watching Lily in the backyard tracing chalk lines along the edge of the patio stones. She was focused, tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth, hair pulled back into a low ponytail that bounced gently every time she reached forward with a new color. She had grown taller over the summer. Stronger, too, not just physically, but in the way she moved through the world. There was a new kind of certainty in her, the quiet kind that came not from being told she was safe, but from seeing that safety fought for and won. The house was quieter these days, not because it was empty, but because the tension that had once hung in the corners had lifted. David still kept the documents, the court rulings, the settlement paperwork, the letters from supporters and even a few apologies, filed neatly in a locked drawer. He didn't revisit them often, but he hadn't forgotten a word. Karen's criminal case was still moving, but slowly. She had been charged with knowingly filing a false report and was now the subject of several civil countersuits from others who had come forward in the wake of the trial. Her name no longer appeared on neighborhood newsletters or community panels. The consulting firm that once employed her had quietly removed every trace of her involvement from their website. She had become a warning, not through public shaming, but through documented accountability. A record. A truth that couldn't be reshaped. The officers had faded from view entirely. No reinstatement, no public statement. Their personnel records now flagged for any department that might try to bring them back. It wasn't retribution. It was protection. David never used the word vindicated. It didn't sit right, because he hadn't fought to prove anything about himself. He already knew who he was. The fight had been about making that matter when it counted, making sure his identity, his love for his daughter, and his right to walk freely weren't conditional on anyone else's comfort. The Brooks Legal Aid Initiative had expanded beyond what he imagined. A half-dozen attorneys now contributed pro bono hours every month. They'd taken on 4 new cases in the past 2 months alone, helping families challenge wrongful detainment and racial targeting. Each case was different, but all carried a thread of what had started on that sidewalk, a decision to stand firm, to refuse silence. David never made the organization about himself. His name was on the paperwork, but not on the signage. He showed up to meetings, guided outreach, and quietly ensured the mission stayed focused. It wasn't his legacy. It was Lily's safety, secured one step at a time. One Sunday afternoon, Lily asked to walk through the old route again, the same path they had taken home from school the day it all began. David agreed, and they set out together, just as they had months before. The streets were quieter now, and though a few familiar faces peeked through windows or watched from behind garden fences, no one followed. No one approached. They walked past the spot where the patrol car had first pulled up, past the corner where she had screamed his name. Lily didn't say anything for a long time, just looked around, eyes moving from house to house. When they reached the crosswalk where the woman had first stopped them, she paused. "This was where it started," she said, her voice calm but certain. David nodded. "It was." Lily turned toward him, her expression thoughtful. "It doesn't feel scary anymore." He looked down at her, saw the quiet in her eyes. Not relief, not joy, but understanding. "That's because we didn't let it stay that way." They continued walking, past hedges that no longer felt like barriers, past driveways where neighbors who once looked away now nodded softly. Some had said nothing. Others had offered small, quiet apologies in the weeks after the verdict. Notes in the mailbox, brief conversations at the market. David hadn't needed them, but he had appreciated the ones that felt real. At home, Lily ran ahead through the front gate and called out behind her, "Come on, I want to finish my picture." David stepped through slowly, closing the gate behind him, the quiet clicking of the latch somehow more final than before. Not an ending exactly, but a close, a seal. Later that night, after dinner and homework and bedtime stories, he sat at the desk in his study, opened the file one last time, and slid a new page into it. A thank you letter from a woman in another city whose charges had just been dropped with the help of one of their partner attorneys. He closed the folder, locked it away, and turned off the light. Justice hadn't arrived in a flash. It had come step by step, piece by piece, in the quiet choices to speak, to act, to keep going. And now, as the house settled into sleep, David knew that what he had built would last. Not because it was loud, but because it was true. And the silence that followed no longer felt like judgment. It felt like peace. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.